You know, after years of running this channel, it's rare that I'm actually shocked by something, but today there is something that I'm shocked about, and it's literally how quantifiably cooked Xbox are. So with that, I have a question for you. Are you ready for the PS6? The next Xbox, whatever the hell the geniuses over there call it? Well, PlayStation and Xbox have spent the last few months teasing new tech and teasing new hardware. This is all happening 5 years after the release of the current console gen, and that does mean we're roughly due for the next one being unveiled. But there's a little bit of a problem with the normal cycle, and I actually have numbers to tell you this story. Here's one of the crazy ones. Over Black Friday, Xbox was outsold by a $200 Kinect-style kids console called the Next Playground. Yeah. Xbox, not just the Series S, no, all of Xbox combined, was literally outsold by a thing that I hadn't even heard of until this was actually a newsworthy thing. Is that not kind of insane? The PS5 took 47% of hardware sales, Switch 2 took 24%, and this motion gaming toy thing aimed at 5-year-olds took 14%. Xbox was somewhere below that. It's kinda crazy. Now, PlayStation have taken until June 2025 to report more monthly users on PS5 than on PS4. Yeah, that's honestly wild. And the PS5 is actually underselling the PS4 by 2.5 million units at the same point in its life cycle. So we see that audiences are split between the 4 and the 5, and now, 5 years in, loads of people just aren't moving to the current generation the way that they used to. And that's a problem for the games that you play and the people who make them. Because basically, the industry can't continue running like this. It genuinely seems that consoles are slowing down. And that raises severe questions for what the hell the future of this industry looks like. And as much as the little PCMR goblin inside me goes, yes, the console gamers have lost. Well, sometimes it is those big companies that just put ridiculous amounts of money into R&D and actually push forward industry standards in a way that benefits everyone. And if that's no longer something that's happening, then gaming will not be moving forward as fast. I'll start off with something tangible. One of the biggest games of 2025 suffered because of this exact problem, and the game is Monster Hunter Wilds. You see, in August, the president of Capcom told Nikkei that the game's slowing sales were caused, in his suggestion anyway, by them not selling on the right platform. You see, PC was not their target market. Console was their target market, and we actually suggested that this is why the PC release was basically struggling so much performance-wise on launch, that they kinda just rushed it forward to hit some of their financial targets. It's quite a fun little dramatic story, but where it gets interesting is that later on, the same guy framed this whole thing a little bit differently. He said that Capcom were hitting what he calls, quote, the PS5 barrier. There simply were not enough PS5s for them to sell copies of their PS5 games on. Same, of course, goes for the Xbox Series. And that is kind of crazy. 5 years into a console cycle, where PC is the dominant platform of a traditionally console-based franchise, all because the new consoles quite literally aren't selling. Kinda wild. Now, in Japan, playing Monster Hunter Wilds online with a friend would cost you about 100,000 yen, that's $675. Kinda difficult to justify for anyone, especially younger generations. That's a lot of money for a PS5. And Capcom's president, Tsujimoto, acknowledged that this wasn't just a Japanese problem. It was actually a global problem. And that's because right now there is a fundamental tension. It's the developers have been building their games for 5 years based on the assumption that players would eventually move on to the next-gen consoles, as they always have before. The only problem is that players have not done what has been expected of them. We've heard the industry angle, but what about the consumer one? Why would someone buy a PS5 right now? I mean, maybe they want to play older games at a better frame rate, or maybe in 4K. If you're an enthusiast like me, then hey, getting to ramble around as Leon Kennedy pretty much at 120 FPS feels bloody great. But for general audiences, console sales have been driven by exclusives. Basically by games that people want that they cannot play on an older machine or a PC at a comparable cost. The high price of a new console is a barrier, but it's one that people have always been able to overcome with the right incentive. That incentive being a big shiny new video game that you just need to play. If you let me ape a point from a video we did earlier on this week, take Naughty Dog as one example. Where is their big new PS5 exclusive game? There hasn't been one, and loads of the new PS5 games were actually playable on the PS4. A bit of that's because, well, fundamentally they're very similar bits of hardware. It's not like the past where things were fundamentally different, say moving from the PS3's utterly insane cell architecture to the PS4's far more standard one. Now, to get back on track here, back in summer 2024, Xbox Series S sales spiked to their highest since launch. And it kind of happened in a way that proves a little bit of the point, that sort of proves why people end up buying lots of things. And that reason was a game called EA Sports College Football. It was not on PC. It was not on the last generation of consoles. But college football is a huge scene in America, and this console was the cheapest way to get that experience. So, you need games to give people a reason to buy consoles, especially when the price of those consoles is only going up, which is kind of the opposite of what usually goes on as a hardware generation progresses. Now, Sony's first-party titles do actually matter here. I mean, there's a reason why Helldivers 2 and Spider-Man 2 have been chart toppers, but looking at the console sale charts, we see a slow drip of Sony cinematic blockbusters a year is clearly not enough to move the needle here. You basically need the whole industry to move on, because there's essentially a bit of a network effect. The more the whole industry says, we're all going to only put our games on the big shiny new thing and not sell our games in the old thing, then the more value there is in buying the new console. But if a lot of the industry decides, you know what, we're going to actually be a bit of a straggler, we're going to publish in the old thing as well, which obviously is them defending their short-term sales, well, guess what? We end up in a strange situation like this one, where consoles are kind of bleeding out because we've accidentally killed the business model that they used to thrive on. There's other things as well, like PC ports for loads of these games that are kind of encouraging people to hold off, amongst, of course, some other structural reasons that I'll come back to in this video. But it's not just this problem of inertia. There is another thing, and that is the game that everybody expected to attract people to the new consoles has been delayed again and again and again. For the whole industry, GTA 6 was something to be terrified and avoid, but also something that the industry needed, because it would drive all the normies back into gaming, back into spending, and back into the new hardware. So while Rockstar's saying they think GTA 6 will be the largest game launch in history is real good for them, and by the way, I do actually think it will be, it's actually even better for the console manufacturers. And I think not just in a nice to have, I think it's something that they quite genuinely need. And I think the actual sales numbers back up that they really do need that. Because if those sales charts are anything to go by, consoles are basically losing out to, well, everything else, including other forms of entertainment entirely. We actually cover this numerous times through 2025. And while this is our opinion, it's worth saying it's not just our opinion. Analysts told VGC that it was a direct impact on PlayStation's own hardware sales estimates. A quote from their report goes as follows: "The delay in GTA 6 is a real blow to the PS5. This was supposed to be the product that got many consumers to get off the PS4 and onto a PS5. Now, that quote actually comes from before the second delay, which added another 6 months. Now, GTA 6 is almost certainly not coming to PC at launch. There's no evidence that it will. It seems it will only be for PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. God knows how it'll run in a Series S, but apparently they're going to try and do that. And GTA being exclusive is a draw that's exponentially bigger than college football. I mean, probably in America and certainly on a global scale. And as you saw with those Xbox Series S numbers, a big game that normal people give a shit about is basically the main thing that will drive sales of a new console. And we just haven't really had that as much as we've generally had it, which is one of the reasons why our sales have kind of just plummeted compared to expectations. I mean, it's not even that, like, we're struggling to keep up with the previous generation sales curve. I mean, it is that, but generally in a growing industry, you'd expect the next generation to, outsell the one that came before it. And that's not been happening. And that matters, because as Capcom has proven in all of their various statements, developers have made expensive bets years ago based on the audience that they expected they would have based on every other console cycle. That just hasn't really happened. And until that audience is somehow there, probably via GTA, then the whole industry is going to have to make some big changes if they're going to get the money that they've made all their plans around. What should be clear by now then is that more than any prior generation, our understanding of how the console market works is being tested and that market is changing. People, as an example, used to replace their consoles over time just to play the newest games, right? But now Call of Duty is still releasing on PS4 12 years later. 12 years! Compare that to when Call of Duty, say, stopped releasing on the PS3. It wasn't 12 years of a gap. This is absolutely crazy. And it's happening because players simply don't seem to need the new consoles to play the games they actually want to play. And that's because the majority of games played in consoles came out midway through the PS4's lifespan. I mean, if you look at like any given week's engagement charts, you do just see the usual crowd there, like say your Fortnites. And that will keep new console sales down. There isn't really a shiny new thing to play because the way we play games has kind of changed and it's consolidated. And most people are now playing older games, often games that came out over a decade ago. But that's probably going to change soon, and not just because of GTA. Yes, people would not jump, and that is perhaps why Sony are getting ready to push them. You see, Sony are winding down PS4 support from 2026, this very new year, and live service developers are already taking note of this. As an example, games like Genshin Impact have already announced they're discontinuing in older generations due to, quote, limitations related to hardware performance and platform application size. But there's an untested theory in all of this. Where do those people go when the console that they bought isn't supported anymore? You see, I say that because upgrading isn't as simple as it used to be. Consoles used to get cheaper over time, so those people who are still playing Fortnite or Genshin on their PS4 by now in the PS5 cycle would have been able to get an amazing Black Friday deal. Maybe the Black Friday Bundaroo from the South Park episode. That used to be what things were like. It's not like that anymore. Margins are so thin once you add up the tariffs, the AI data center driven component price rises, GPUs, RAM, all that fun, and also currency fluctuations. We see these companies simply don't have that option. And here's how stark it's actually gotten. According to Circana, the average price paid for a new console in the US was $235 in November 2019. $235. Do you know what it is now in November 2025? It's $439. The prices have nearly doubled. And as those prices have doubled, the number of units sold has dropped from 3.9 million to 1.6 million. That is less than half the volume at nearly twice the price. So that's not really a slow transition. That is in, I think, reality, a whole market contracting. Now, maybe PC is eating up loads of that. Maybe, I don't know, Switch 2 is eating up some of it. But actually, I think it is a genuine slowdown. We've seen that console game sales have been going down or have been flat. In effect, we're seeing tens of millions of people basically fall off the wagon. And whenever the PS4 support ends in 2026, at some point in this year, well, how many of them are just going to go somewhere else? And we kind of know the PlayStation agrees with Capcom that this PS5 barrier exists, at the very least in Japan. You see, in Japan, basically, they've had a very just flat economy for a very, very long time. Wages have basically stayed flat. And that's actually why they've revealed a new region-locked PS5 sold in Japan at around $350. Because basically they've realized, well, people aren't able to afford buying a PS5 in Japan. And if that happens, our whole business model dies. And you know what? Once they did that, hardware sales quadrupled in the following weeks. But of course, that's just Japan. That's one country. It's a big country, but it is just one country. And it's a currency-driven solution that won't really work elsewhere. So we're left in a situation where if the console makers can't boost game sales via a larger install base, well, they're still going to need money, so they're going to have to find other ways to get that money. And that is what will change the face of this industry. Do you know who's the leader of this? Well, it's our good friend Phil. You see, Xbox has been an ambassador for this new approach, because if you take a look at them, you see they've basically given up on discrete hardware in hopes of just creating an ecosystem that exists absolutely everywhere. Though obviously, under Microsoft's profit mandates, they still do need to release their games on all platforms to recoup the cost. So it's not like they can just go all in, Game Pass plus streaming and nowhere else. No, they do need to sell their games everywhere. Of course, PlayStation have also done some of this. They're releasing their games faster and faster on PC. No wonder that's where loads of people with good GPUs that can play PlayStation games exist. And clearly, for whatever reason, those people haven't bought a PS5, and Sony have even been testing whether it's worth asking for money from Xbox players with Helldivers 2. Yeah, everyone is scrambling around. Yes, in the long term, their strategic stuff probably would be well supported by exclusives, at least if you were to think about this industry in the terms that we used to. But quite obviously, they need the money now, and that means selling their games absolutely everywhere, even if that means losing one of the big things that would lure people either from a competitor's console to theirs or from the previous generation to the new generation. And in giving that up, the whole thing that has driven console sales has kinda just fallen off. Now, it would be easy to read this as saying, it is you, the audience, who are at fault. You have not been diligent enough at buying your consoles, you naughty bastards. But obviously that would be silly, because in reality, this is an industry trying to exist at perhaps the worst possible time for console hardware makers in living memory. And I really do mean that. Did you know that companies like Microsoft are firing executives if they're not able to secure DRAM supply? That's an actual story that's happened because, well, RAM supplies have been bought up. A lot of them by our good friend Sam Altman. Thanks, Sam. So is any wonder, then, that senior leadership at PlayStation are actively telling investors not to expect a new device soon? I mean, could you imagine the sheer chaos of just over half of your users on the PS5, just under half of your users on the PS4, and then you dropping a PS6 on top of everyone? That would kind of be wild. And that's why Sony have been framing the PS5 as being in the middle of its journey. This was actually said by Sony's CFO, and he explained it to shareholders that basically the industry cannot afford to rush onwards to end this generation and have a big exciting new one. And the reason why is they've seen what happened to them last time. Yes, COVID was one anomaly that could have set things back, but it's an anomaly that deeply hurt production schedules. Of course, it hurt the production schedules of games that were needed to drive users to buy the next-gen consoles. That's something that we've all felt, maybe in the lack of big, exciting new exclusives, or say, games like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, that really did feel completely out of date in concept by the time that they'd launched. But of course, now that these games are actually coming out, we've actually got a whole new problem. And that problem is an economy that is pushing premium devices out of the reach of most spenders, and an industry that is caught in the trap of ever-increasing component prices, pushing them even harder to raise their prices. And as all this happens, the one-time entry fee of gaming, the console that you plug in and play, has only got more and more out of reach. And honestly, it's even worse than normal. I mean, it's not just that it's kind of went a bit flat. I mean, in the past, if you were holding off on buying the new console for a few years, you'd actually get yourself a deal. Now, you would get yourself an anti-deal, because if you held off for cheaper prices later, well, tough shit, there have been multiple price increases. That means that the people who are the most sensitive to price actually now have to pay even more, as opposed to the normal of paying less. So it has just completely broken how these things usually sell. So, are you ready for the PlayStation 6 or the next Xbox? You're probably not. But the good news is, neither are Microsoft or Sony. And while the Western hardware makers are stuck in this trap, there's money watching from the sidelines. That's money that's been quietly buying stakes in studios, funding games, and positioning itself as an alternative to all of this. But it hasn't worked out, and if you're wondering why so many developers have been taking investment from overseas, there's a reason. That reason is not just generosity, and it's actually led to a lot of those studios now being killed. If you want to learn about that story, watch this video next.